Vaporwave is a genre which gets a bad rap. It's often generalized as a genre that takes no effort to produce, and for the longest time I was one of the people who generalized it this way. Every time I would listen to a Vaporwave song, I couldn't really see much of value. Thankfully, this attitude I had towards this genre kind of shifted when I would become more active in the music communities I was already a part of. Future funk is in many ways inspired by Vaporwave and would most likely not exist as the genre it is today without Vaporwave existing before it. I think meeting people involved with the Vaporwave community definitely helped me warm up to the genre. I started out listening to a lot of Vaporwave classics. Floral Shop, Blank Banshee Zero, and 200% Electronica were all albums I tried and loved. And these albums helped to form an understanding of the place Vaporwave had in music as a whole. Vaporwave is often oversimplified as slowed versions of pre-existing songs, but there's more depth to it than that. If done right, it can transform the meaning of a song and flip the general atmosphere of the song on its head. This was an important distinction for me to learn, because like with future funk, there will always be songs and artists that I enjoy, and those that I don't. It was just a matter of finding the ones that clicked with me. But once I found the artists that I liked, I really started to like them. Vaporwave was a genre I was able to find a lot of value in, despite all the negative associations that it had. And it was interesting seeing all the ways that these artists tried to defy the stereotypes that Vaporwave had associated with it. But one album I listened to was different. It got recommended to me by a friend, and after the album art caught my eye and I set aside some time to listen to it, I ended up finding my favorite album of 2020. Celestial by bliss3three's represents everything that vapor should be. Each song is airy, ethereal, and blissful, but in contrast there's a layer of static coating the sound which varies in intensity from song to song. This dynamic creates a really interesting balance between these two styles. The unequivocal bliss dampened by the dismal sound of the static is what makes me so fixated on this album. The way that it can go from cheerfully melancholic to absolutely crestfallen in the matter of a couple seconds has a real impact on the listener. I remember even on my first listen, this drastic transformation made me sit up in my chair. That is when I started to take this album much more seriously. 6 months ago, when I talked about getting lost in music, this is the kind of album I was talking about. The type of album to completely engross you in the world that it creates. And if I had to define the feeling this album exudes, it would be nostalgia. I was born right in the early 2000s, a time where technology and the internet had become widespread, but wasn't being used for virtually everything quite yet, and the songs in this album reflect this cultural shift. One of the biggest examples of this shift is in mall culture. The 2000s were the time past the 80s and 90s where malls weren't just places to shop, they were places where people would go after school or work to spend their free time. By the 2000s, online shopping was becoming popular, and people were going to malls less and less. I remember growing up in the mall being treated as a hassle. My parents would almost always prefer to buy something online rather than to make the trip to the mall. But in those rare mall trips, when the mall is inactive and the ambience of the mall is the only thing you can really hear, that is what this album reminds me of. All of the tropes of a mall on its last legs are here. The almost empty food court tucked in the corner playing the same commercial sounding music on loop at all times is represented in Carousel 1. The rigged claw machines littered throughout the mall with attention-grabbing music reminds me of the second track, Idle, and the 12th track sounds like the background music that would play in individual stores within the mall. But I think the song that by far best encapsulates this blissful nostalgic feeling is Carousel 2, what I think is the apex of what this album is trying to get across, cuts through the noise like a knife. The lows from the third song on this album, I'm not even gonna try and pronounce that, are droning, and the way that the music loops and loops for those 33 seconds builds tension. You're waiting for this to go somewhere, but it just doesn't. That's why Carousel 2 is so jarring. The highs from this song explode as soon as the song plays, and the echoey booming sound of the song is inescapable. I'm not even gonna try and compare Carousel 2 to anything I've experienced, because I don't think that there's any real life comparison I can really make. It's a flurry of different emotions and experiences which culminates in one 3.5 minute track, which gives me nostalgia for people, places, and things I've never experienced myself, which is how you know a song really hits the mark. This album really succeeds in building a world that exudes a feeling of dystopian nostalgia, and this feeling is one that really connected with me. The reason I say this is my favorite album of 2020 is because so far I have not had another album which has spoken to me on the same level that this album has. I listen to a lot of music which I really like, but it's rare I find a piece of music I can connect with this much. Music that can make me feel both uneasy and at ease, anxious and contented. That is the mark of a good album. Since initially getting into this genre, I had been waiting to find a vaporwave album like this. One that I couldn't find any flaws with, and one that solidified vaporwave as a choice genre for me. And I'm glad that I found it, because this is my perfect vaporwave album. Hey, before this video ends, I want to apologize for my lack of activity lately. I'm currently a senior in high school, and I've been focusing on applying to colleges. I'm still working on that Evangelion video, and I'll have another video out before the end of the year. That being said, thank you all for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. And one last thing, do me a favor and go support bliss3three's on their musical endeavors. I'll leave their link in the description.